down the short strip, afterburners flaring bright orange against the midday haze. Beside it, ground crews scrambled to launch a swarm of Beaver kamikaze drones, sleek, black silhouettes with composite wings, and a single mission: not to come back. The flight plan was as unforgiving as the target. 350 kilometers inside Russian-occupied territory sat one of the Kremlin's most productive Shahed 136 drone factories. American intelligence estimated the site could push out up to 40 of the Iranian-designed loitering munitions every week, enough to keep Ukraine's power grid and frontline positions under constant threat. The facility wasn't just a warehouse, it was a fortress. Layered air defenses bristled around it. Long-range S-300 and S-400 batteries, roving SA-15 Tor systems, and a Kushuka-4 electronic warfare truck capable of pumping out 500 watts of GPS jamming power. Every inch of sky around it was a no-fly zone. Every approach corridor a potential kill box. Today's strike team wasn't coming in as a mass formation. It would be a knife-edge, precision Operation One jet, 4 precision glide bombs, and a drone swarm to confuse, distract, and overwhelm. The mission clock was already running, and once they crossed into contested airspace, fuel and physics would leave no margin for hesitation. In less than an hour, the outcome would prove whether Soviet-era airframes and battlefield-engineered electronics could survive the most sophisticated air defense network outside Moscow, and whether 37 pounds of explosives in the right place could change the course of a war. The target didn't exist in isolation. It sat in the middle of one of the most heavily defended bubbles of airspace in the war. Long-range S-300 batteries guarded the outer ring, their search radars sweeping arcs out to nearly 60 miles. Closer in, the newer S-400 stood ready, each gravestone fire control radar capable of locking onto a target the size of a fighter jet well before it crossed the 50-mile mark. Lurking even nearer, SA-15 Tor systems roamed on tracked chassis, able to pop up from cover and fire within seconds. Their short-range missiles optimized to kill low-flying aircraft or incoming munitions. Then there was the Kushuka-4 electronic warfare vehicle, an unassuming truck on the outside, but inside, racks of emitters capable of blasting half a kilowatt of noise into GPS frequencies. Any weapon or drone depending solely on satellite guidance would find itself blind and drifting long before it reached the target. The terrain offered no kindness. Low ridgelines, winding rivers, and spiderwebs of high-tension power lines crisscrossed the approach. To a pilot at 500 feet, the hills could mask radar one moment, then turn into lethal obstacles the next. For the drones, the same geography was both a cloak and a gauntlet. One wrong altitude call, and the mission would end against a steel tower or in a river gorge. It was early summer, the air shimmering at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, thermals rising off the valley floors. Light turbulence rippled through the lower atmosphere, enough to jostle a wingtip, but not enough to throw a steady hand off course. For small stealth-profile UAVs, the thin haze and broken clouds were a gift diffusing sunlight, making their approach harder to track. Every advantage and every danger lay in the same airspace. The difference between them would come down to seconds, angles, and the ability to read the terrain like a map etched in muscle memory. From the moment the MiG-29's nose dipped toward the ridgeline, the mission shifted from planning to survival. At just 500 feet above the ground, the fighter was threading a corridor that existed more on paper than in the sky, an invisible dead zone between the overlapping radar envelopes of the S-300 to the west and the SA-15 patrol routes to the east. The margin for error was measured in seconds and in yards. Drift 2 miles left, and the S-300's 48 N-6 missiles could reach him in under 25 seconds. Stray 3 miles right, and the SA-15's 9 M331 interceptors would be on him before his threat receiver could even scream. Ahead, the terrain rolled in long, shallow swells, each hilltop masking the jet from one set of radars while threatening to expose it to another. The MiG's pilot kept his eyes bouncing between the heads-up display and the real horizon, every control input calculated to keep his radar cross-section buried in the ground clutter. Meanwhile, the first wave of Beaver kamikaze drones was already airborne, having launched from concealed trailers nearly 50 miles apart. Their profiles were deliberate, climbing to 300.500 feet, not to hide but to be seen. Their engines droned steadily in the warm summer air, their transponders spoofing the radar signatures of larger strike aircraft. Russian operators watching their scopes would see what they thought was the opening move of a conventional air raid. Multiple slow, high blips moving in from two vectors. Within minutes, SA-15 batteries began to orient their search radars toward the drones, pulling coverage away from the real threat, still hugging the ground miles behind. In the cockpit of the MiG, the pilot saw the first enemy radar sweep swing off his bearing. For the briefest moment, the corridor widened not in space, but in opportunity. He pushed the throttles forward, engines roaring at military power, knowing that every foot gained now could mean the difference between release and never coming home. 45 minutes before the MiG-29 even cleared Ukrainian airspace, the first punch had already been thrown. A pair of Su-24 Fencer Street reeked in low from the southwest, each carrying two AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. Their target, a key Russian search radar site near Tomak, the one node whose coverage could have stitched together the S-300 and S-400 networks into a seamless kill zone. At 60 miles out, the HARMs went active, homing on the radar's emissions with surgical precision. Operators at the Tomak site saw the threat too late. Protocol dictated an immediate shutdown to break the missile's lock, and that's exactly what they did. The HARMs flew harmlessly into dead air, but the damage was done. The radar went dark, and for the next 20 minutes, a blind spot the size of a small state opened up in the Russian defense grid. That was when Ukraine's electronic warfare units went to work. From well inside friendly territory, they began broadcasting false radar returns, phantom strike packages appearing to mass in the northwest. To Russian air defense commanders, it looked like the Su-24 attack had been just the prelude to a larger assault coming from another vector. The Beaver drones made the illusion real. Rising to 300, 500 feet, they cruised into the engagement zones of multiple SA-15 batteries. The tour operators saw the blips on their scopes, confirmed them with optical trackers, and committed. Missile hatches snapped open, white smoke trails corkscrewing into the sky as the first salvos went out. For every missile launched at the decoys, there was one less waiting for the MiG-29's GBU-39 second. More importantly, each launch gave away the SA-15's position, their search radars now burning bright on the MiG's threat receiver. Back in the cockpit, the MiG's pilot watched the threat indicators shift again, more radars pulling away, more gaps opening. The deception plan was working. The Russian defenses weren't gone, but their eyes were looking the wrong way. And in modern air combat, that's half the battle won. By 3:22 p.m., the corridor had been cleared as much as it ever would be. The MiG-29's pilot pushed the throttles forward, feeling the twin RD-33 respond with a deep metallic roar. He pulled back on the stick, trading speed for altitude, climbing from 500 feet to 15,000 inch a little under a minute. The climb lit him up on every radar in the sector S-300, S-400, and SA-15 scopes, all painting the same target. Every second spent up here was a race against the clock. In the weapons bay display, 4 green indicators waited for his command. Each GBU-39 small-diameter bomb was already humming with power. Wings folded tight, guidance systems ready. The Kashuka-4's 500-watt GPS jamming flooded the air, but the American-made bombs were built for exactly this kind of fight. The first release came off the starboard pylon, the MiG jolting slightly as 250 pounds of steel and explosives dropped away. 6 seconds later, the second bomb peeled off the port side, then the third from the center line, and the fourth trailing a heartbeat behind. At precisely 2.7 seconds after separation, each weapon deployed its wings, transforming into slender gliders capable of riding the thin air for over 50 miles. With GPS signals choked, the bombs switched instantly to inertial navigation, their internal gyros and accelerometers charting a silent, invisible path toward the target. In the final miles, their uncooled infrared seekers would take over, locking onto the unique heat signatures of the factory's rooftops. At that exact moment, 2 Beaver kamikaze drones arrived over the target from different headings. One dove into the guard post at the western perimeter, shredding its blast walls and scattering defenders. The other slammed into the communications tower, severing antennas and blinding the local command network. The Russian defenders were still shouting into dead radios when the first GBU-39 crossed the outer fence line, gliding silently toward its mark. The first GBU-39 came in low and fast, its infrared seeker locked onto the broad heat signature of the assembly hall's metal roof. At 68 degrees of impact angle, the bomb punched clean through the corrugated steel and support beams before detonating in the heart of the production line. Welding rigs, jigs, and half-completed airframes of Shahed 136 drones were torn apart in a flash, molten fragments spraying across the shop floor. 28 seconds later, the second GBU-39 arrived from a different vector, skimming just over the perimeter wall before dropping through the roof of the electronics workshop. This was the nerve center, the place where Iranian-designed autopilot units were flashed with their target profiles. The blast ripped through rows of workbenches loaded with circuit boards, power regulators, and diagnostic laptops. The overpressure wave shredded delicate components in an instant, erasing the plant's ability to produce precision-guided drones. The third bomb was the killer blow. Guided in from the southeast, it slammed directly into the storage warehouse, where Ukrainian intelligence estimated 18 fully assembled Shaheds sat on their launch cradles, each armed with 88 pounds of explosives. The chain reaction was instant and catastrophic, one detonation touching off the next, feeding into fuel drums and missile propellant stacks. A fireball rolled 300 feet into the sky, shockwaves rattling windows 2 miles away. The fourth GBU-39 delivered the double tap, dropping into the smoking crater where the warehouse had stood and finishing off anything that might have survived the initial inferno. Meanwhile, the two Beaver kamikaze drones completed their own missions. One tore through the parts depot, igniting shelves of critical spares. The other smashed into the Kushuka-4 electronic warfare truck, silencing its GPS jamming output. For the first time that day, the Russian air defense net around the factory went quiet seconds too late to save it. By the time the smoke began to drift westward, the damage was already irreversible. In less than 3 minutes of precision strikes, Russia's primary Shahed 136 production hub in the south had been erased. The assembly hall was gone, the electronics workshop reduced to scorched rubble, and the warehouse nothing more than a crater, rimmed with twisted steel. With the Kushuka-4 destroyed, there was no GPS jamming to shield the wreckage, no electronics left to salvage. The entire inventory of spare parts, precision guidance modules, and fuel reserves had gone up in fireballs that burned hot enough to warp the steel trusses of surrounding structures. Intelligence analysts later estimated that Russia had lost at least 2 months of production capacity in the region, time it couldn't buy back with quick repairs. The replacement of specialized programming stations and calibrated assembly rigs would require importing sensitive equipment from hundreds of miles away, a process vulnerable to both sanctions and further strikes. Until then, any operational Shahed 136 second would have to be trucked in from facilities more than 250 miles away. That meant long convoys moving over exposed roads and rail lines, all within reach of Ukrainian reconnaissance and strike assets. Each mile driven increased the odds of another ambush, another column of black smoke rising over Russian-held territory. What had been a secure, high-output drone factory at breakfast was, by nightfall, a liability. Instead of fueling Russia's drone campaign, the site had become a smoking warning to every other high-value target in the sector. No matter how deep inside defended airspace, you could still be reached. What unfolded over those few minutes was more than a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of how modern warfare is being rewritten. A single MiG-29, flying on a 40-year-old airframe, paired with a handful of low-cost kamikaze drones, had just punched through the densest air defense network outside Moscow. Precision, deception, and timing had done what mass formations and brute force could not. The message was unmistakable. In 21st century combat, the fusion of human skill and unmanned systems can turn even the most fortified target into rubble. It wasn't about overwhelming firepower. It was about exploiting weaknesses, layering distractions, and delivering a decisive blow before the enemy could react. By the time the last echoes of secondary explosions faded, a column of black smoke towered nearly 3,000 feet into the summer sky. Beneath it, the remains of dozens of Shahed drones cooked